All right, injuries. As my wife practices her dance moves a few feet away from me, so this is by far the least entertaining thing that is taking place in this living room right now. But this is take one. Let's try to continue with it. And I think that this will double as a desktop discourse. I think what I want to do here is maybe try, if anyone else is interested, to get a little discussion going about injuries in tabletop games. I don't think that there's been anything out there like that. I don't think that it's anything that that the replay gamer has handled in some of his tabletop talks, of which, of course, the desktop discourse is inspired by, or where I got the idea for doing that. So, and I know like Dave Gardner does similar with some of his chats, and of course the digital to dice topics as well. But I want to take on injuries, and of course, this is hardly a copyrightable thing. So if anybody else in the community wants to do a similar topic and turn it into a video as opposed to a discussion in comments or anything like that, then of course you're more than welcome, and I'd be interested to hear how you handle injuries in your tabletop games. So I put a few things here. This is my own little hockey guy inspired whiteboard of madness. I have Blue Zone Hockey up here at the top because though I've not done a why I enjoy video for the game Blue Zone Hockey, and it's a pretty good game. Probably my favorite thing in the game, and it's kind of weird, I think, to say that about a game, is the way that injuries are handled. It's a strange thing, but it's not a knock on the game itself. As I say, it's quite a good game. And I just always, in particular, really like the way that it handles injuries because it's simplistic, but I think it's also realistic. It's also a little in line with Stone Cold Hockey in the way that Stone Cold Hockey does it, and that the injury sort of just impacts a team ability. It doesn't really target a player per se. And so in Blue Zone Hockey, I've not played it for a while, but in general, my memory, it goes like this. You have the level of player. It can be like a star player, or I forget if bench is another level, or just a regular, ordinary player. And what happens in that game is you'll have fewer match cards going into the following game if your team is impacted by injury, or in the middle of a game, you could have match cards for your team come out of the pile if your team is impacted by an injury. And then post game, what you do in Blue Zone is you do a 2d6 severity roll. So it's real simple. You just take 2d6, and then for each game after that, for that team, you're going to try to do an attempt to cure the injury prior to the game. And so you roll 2d6. And if they're, I think it's if that they're equal to or greater than, or at least that's how I played it. It would have to be because at 12 you can't get greater than 12. So if it's equal to or greater than prior to the game, then you cure the injury. And so sometimes when I was doing reports in Delphi, I would talk about how, okay, this team was a little better on this day because they got, the player back, a star player returned or something like that. Again, they're deliberately vague about it, as is a game like Stone Cold Hockey, a highlight game that abstracts some things. And so if you get an injury in a game like that, which again, I like the way that Stone Cold handles them within, in games, then it might be something like you lose like a -1 to your attack, or you probably drop some points in stamina, and maybe you lose again to your control, your defense, and things like that. So there is that. And what I'm thinking of doing is for Hockey Bones, and I do abbreviated seasons with Hockey Bones, and so I'm thinking of carrying over something similar, but me being me, for no other reason, I guess, though I think there are some others, I'm going to modify it. So Larry, I'm no less fond of you for it, but I think your chart of doom, the Mr. Aloha chart of doom, has been replaced for this. I've been hinting at this for a while. I've come up with a few things, like 3 measures here. I think I'm probably only going to use 2 of them, because I think if I actually enact all 3, then probably it will be an overcorrection. It will go too far the other way, and I'll basically never have injuries in this game, and certainly none that are long term. And so that's not what I want to do either. I don't want it to be too unrealistic. Not that I am necessarily fond of there being injuries in a game at all. In fact, in some games like Dock Hockey, which I play a lot, there is a measure in that game. It's the blackjack on the second or fourth card of a sequence, a play sequence, can possibly injure somebody. But of course, in Dock Hockey and in some other games as well, like I would throw Shootout in there and Mike Owen's Quick Play Pro Hockey, if a player missed time that season, they're already lower in the lineup. They're not going to come up as often on scoring chances. They're not going to come up as often to be rolled up as often for goals and assists. I noticed that even with Mike Owen's quick play, which flat out doesn't really have injuries in it. But when I was replaying the 1947 NHL season with all the teams, but with Montreal particularly being a Habs fan, noticing the punchline that Elmer Locke only had about half the number of points as his line mates Toe Blake and Rocket Richard, and it was simply because Elmer Locke, if you take a closer look, he missed half the season that year in 47. So getting back to this, and similar with Doc, like players, they won't come up as often. Enough said probably on that. So with Hockey Bones here, what I want to do, I want to take from Blue Zone Hockey this 2d6 severity roll, but I'm going to modify it a little bit because, again, I am working with a shortened campaign for this. My current project with Bones, the idea is just to sort of go through the history of the league over the seasons, the years, and decades. And so that would probably take me more than a lifetime, if more than a couple even, if I was going to play a full, even with 6 teams for like full 82 game schedule. I don't know. I mean, it's, I'm not Superman like CKY. He has multiple projects, seasons on the go, all at once with Hockey Bones. But anyway, so the 2d6 severity roll, and then what I'm going to do is, because again it's for a shortened season, -1 after a certain number of games, based on how badly that player was injured during the game. And that's one thing that I'm looking at, and I'll revisit that. I want to mention a couple other things here as well before I forget to. So this is what comes up on the action code matrix for a skater's card in Hockey Bones. I guess rarely too, it's also in the goalie's matrix, somewhat less common I think there, but only so the I question mark, what I'm thinking of doing is only in a red D6, actually going and doing a follow-up roll to see whether or not a player was injured. I think this was actually, I sense that this was something probably, I want to say it was probably suggested actually by the same Mr. Aloha a while ago here, this only in a red D6, going and checking and seeing if there's an injury. And so right away, that should cut my injuries down to about a sixth, and so I'd only be rolling for a couple of guys as opposed to the dozen here that got injured during week 1. And that's basically what it comes down to. Like, I'm doing a shortened 10-game regular season, but if this is going to happen in every week, I know some of these guys would come back in the interim, but I'm looking at 120 injured guys for a 144-team league. I have rosters of 24 players on the 6 teams, so that multiplies, I guess, to 144. That's too much. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be dealing with injuries that much, that often, putting new stickers, which actually the stickers don't work, so I got to glue them on the cards, and just doing that in between every game. It takes away from playing time. So it's just a bit much. I don't want to do that. And of course, as I mentioned there with other games like Doc and Mike's, I like games where I don't have to bother with injuries, where I can keep it simple. And so that would cut it down to about 1/6, and I feel like that might be a little bit too far. So there's another thing that I'm thinking of doing as well, where, because a team like Boston, they can have up to 4 or 5 at least, opponent OIP, this is OIP, opponent intimidation points in the game Hockey Bones. The way that I have Boston structured right now, again, I've created a monster. I don't know what I'm doing as a Habs fan. But I mean, it's only 1 game in the season, but they really smothered the Habs, and I feel like that's an improved Habs team. But anyway, opponent intimidation points, Boston can have a handful of those, basically 4 or 5 of those at least on the ice at any given time, meaning that unless you roll a blue 6 or maybe a blue 5 or 6, the player's injured. So I don't want to... Sorry, I'm in a noisy city, remember? Pause and a sip there, but where was I? So the opponent intimidation points, I'm thinking of modifying that so that if, similar if there are 0 opponent intimidation points in the ice, it's possible you can still sustain a fluky injury if the blue die roll of 1 comes up in the follow-up injury roll. And I'm thinking of doing that for 0 or 1, because 1 normally it would be a 2 or 1 rolled in the blue die. And so I'm thinking of shifting it so if there are 2 or 3 opponent intimidation points in the ice, then the player's only injured on a blue die roll of 1 or 2. 4 or greater, so in Boston's case sometimes, possibly also New York's, I don't know. I'd have to double check. This could just be a blue die roll of 1 to 3. And so there's still a 50-50 chance that the player, he might fall awkwardly, be banged up, prompt a play stoppage. The team, staff, they go over and they have a look at him. And maybe he goes to the locker room for a minute or 3, but he'll be okay. So again, I think if I do both of these, probably I'm never going to have an injury, and so I'm just deciding which one. There are advantages and disadvantages to both, of course. This one here, I like the simplicity of it. I'm only checking for injuries sometimes. But this one here, yeah. And this way, too, if the red d6 comes up and if they have all those opponent intimidation points out there, then the player's basically guaranteed an injury. So there is that, and this one is also fewer rolls if I didn't say that already. This one here, it would be the same number of rolls. It's just that the players wouldn't be injured as often. So anyway, you can let me know. Feel free to let me know what you think about this. I would encourage that. I would welcome that. If there's something that you think, if maybe from your own experience, tabletop playing, rolling your way through some projects, if you've how you've handled injuries, how you handle a dozen players, some pretty big star names among them, all getting injured in week 1. I mean, one of the main reasons why I do this is I want sort of this constant best on best competition. I know some other tabletop players, they delight in playing the crappy teams and things like that, and that's awesome too. There's nothing at all wrong with that, but this is what I like, at least for this kind of competition. So for this ongoing kind of best on best, tournament, it's like a double round robin regular season plus best of 5 semifinals and final. I'm just gonna put this part of it anyway to practice. So I did say I would return to this. So what I'm going to do here is if the player left for the game, and so in this case in week 1 that was Dunk McCollum, Ron Ellis, and Henri Richard, just those 3. It means that they won't get a -1 until after 5 games. And so it's possible that a low 2d6 severity roll, like say if I drop and roll Snake Eyes again, then it's possible that then they're guaranteed to be back the next game. And so what looked really bad during the game is in fact not all that bad in the end. And I feel like that's realistic as well to actual, real, current, ongoing, and probably even past NHL hockey. As vague as injuries are in more recent eras with the whole he has an upper body injury, he has a lower body injury, and they don't really